natural right, a right or several rights that are conceived as part of natural law, and that is therefore thought to exist independently of rights created by the government or society, such as the right to life, liberty, and property. See natural law. So when they define and give a description to us concerning natural rights, they enumerate and they list the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property. And they say that these are rights that exist independently of rights created by the government. The government did not give you these rights. You have these rights and freedoms due to natural law or natural existence. So we can gather that we have a set of rights, a set of freedoms that exist independently of government-created law, independently of government-created rules or regulations. In the Constitution Act of Canada, 1982, Article 7, it reads as follows: everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So, when we look at the nature of the rights, it says everyone has the right to life and liberty. Now they changed the word property to security of the person, a security element. But when we look at the first two, it's very clear. Everyone has the right to life and liberty. We go back up to the definition of natural rights, and we see that a natural right exists independently of rights created by the government, and it's a right to life and liberty. So natural right is a right to life and liberty. Constitution Act, Article 7, expresses the right to life and the right to liberty. Therefore, it is expressing natural rights, natural law. Now, when we look into the court judgment, Supreme Court of Canada, Thomson Newspaper Limited versus Canada, it states that concerning this verse that we're talking about, this article of law, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, serves to underline the human element involved. Only human beings can enjoy these rights. Why? Because as we just saw, these are natural rights. And these rights exist independently of the government. They weren't created by the government. They're ours because we are men and women, because we are human beings and we have the right to exercise these natural rights. Only human beings can enjoy these rights. Everyone then must be read in the light of the rest of the section and defined to exclude corporations and other artificial entities incapable of enjoying life, liberty, or security of the person, and include only human beings. So the Constitution Act, Article 7, is teaching us that only men and women, only human beings, the plural of men and women, have the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. They have the ability to exercise their natural rights, their natural freedoms. When we look to R. versus Wagner in 2015, he's talking about the rule of law. And he says the rule of law not only finds itself in the preamble to the Charter of Rights, its spirit is manifested throughout the document, from the restrictions on the state powers, and then finally at the developing fringes of the new natural law, which goes by the name human rights or other assertions. So you see, now he says that natural law is being brought forth through human rights and fundamental freedoms. So we go back up and we see that a natural law, natural right, is described here for us. It's the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, or right to life, liberty, and property. We saw how that in the Constitution Act, it brings forth this right. And now the judge is telling us that these natural rights that are being brought forth through the Constitution Act in Article 7 are now what we call human rights and freedoms. No longer do we just refer to it as natural rights, but we refer to it as human rights and freedoms. He goes on to state that those unwritten principles of natural law, the fact that we have rights and freedoms that exist apart from the government, that were not given to us by the government, those unwritten principles tend to be largely replicated in the text of the Constitution, which Section 7 of Canada's Charter of Rights striking me as a prime example. Our written Constitution reflects many, many influences, including the drafters, the people who wrote up the Constitution, their awareness of natural law. Those unwritten principles that say that every human being, every man and woman, have natural rights, and these rights exist independently of rights created by the government. These principles now find their expression in Article 7 of the Constitution Act of Canada, 1982. They didn't originate through the Constitution Act of Canada, but they found their protection and ensurement through that article of law. Now, when you look into the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man, you find something very similar in Article 1. It says, every human being has the right to life, liberty, and security of his person. So, we have to go through jurisprudence. We have to look into a court case to find out what the designation everyone means here in Canada. By studying the court case, we learned that everyone that's being referred to in the Constitution Act of Canada is referring to strictly only human beings. The judge declares that for us. And he gives us the reason why. He says because the nature of the rights and the nature of the liberties being brought forth are only compatible with human beings. That's how we can, with men and women. That's how we can define the right. However, in the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Men, they directly enumerate it as being the rights of human beings, as being natural law. In Article 1, it says every human being has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So if we rephrase that, every human being has natural rights. Every human being has the ability to exercise their natural rights. So again, in Canada, it's hidden, but in America, through this declaration, it's being brought forth very clearly. Same operation of law is taking place within Canada and within the United States of America. We start as individuals that have natural rights, fundamental rights and freedoms. Now, these rights exist independently of rights created by the government, and they are rights such as, now it's not limited to this, such as means, I'm giving you an example, but there's a lot more to this. So, such as the right to life, liberty, and property. Now, these rights become protected within the Constitution Act of 1982 in Canada in Article 7, when they define the subject as everyone, which now we find out it means a human being. So the human being has the right to his natural rights and freedoms, which are now better known as human rights and freedoms. And the same operation of law transpires in America. American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Men, it says every human being has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So you have the right to exercise your natural rights and freedoms. Let's look into the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 16. There it states that everyone shall have the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. And the way that plays out is that everyone here that is being brought forth is the human being, the man or the woman. So we as men and women, we have the right to take recognition everywhere as a juridical personality, as a class of person, as a class of being before the law. So we can enter into recognition as the driver, as the student, as the patient, as the consumer. All those designations, driver, patient, consumer, those designations are considered classes of persons, classes of beings before the law. And we have the right to enter into recognition before the law as that person, or take recognition, or stand under that class of designation. Now, that doesn't create two different distinct entities. You can't walk up there and say, well, I'm a human being and I'm entering into recognition as a person before the law. Now I'm two different distinct beings. No. If you enter into recognition as the person before the law, then you're the person before the law. You as a human being will be bearing the consequences of the duties and obligations of the enactment, because you have entered into recognition. Now, when you look into the American Convention on Human Rights, it says, for the purpose of this convention, person means every human being. So when you see the word person being used, should be the first time, but when you see the word person being used, it means every human being. So Article 3 of this convention, it says the right to juridical personality. Wow, pretty familiar, right? We've seen that a lot. We see it in the international covenants, we see it in the Quebec Civil Code, now we're seeing it in the American side of things. So Article 3, right to juridical personality. Every person, so remember, for the convention, the word person means human being, so every human being has the right to recognition as a person before the law. So if they're talking about juridical personality, the class of person, the class of being, then we understand that to take recognition as a person before the law means the juridical personality, just like it's describing in the International Covenant, and just like it describes in the Quebec Civil Code. In the Quebec Civil Code, Article 1, it says every human being possesses juridical personality. So you can take recognition as a juridical personality. And when you do this, you have the full enjoyment of your civil rights. Remember, I already spoke about it, that civil rights are rights, duties, and obligations that flow from enactments, statutory powers. Enactments and regulations, statutory powers. That's what produces civil rights. Those rights, those duties, those obligations are placed upon statutory creatures, are placed upon a class of beings. So if you enter into recognition as that class of being, then you owe the duty and obligation to the enactment. When we look into the ground law, the foundational law of Canada, more specifically the Constitution Act of 1982, we find several subject and players being brought forth in that Constitution Act. We find the citizen, we find the individual, we find the person, and we find everyone. And through study and through research, we come to understand that these are different designations in law, and these different designations operate different rights and freedoms. We learn that everyone in Canadian law refers to the human being in Article 7. And most of the time when we see the word person in Canadian law, it's actually referring to a class of being, a class of person, a statutory creature. Well, when we come to the Convention on Human Rights in America, they flip it around on us. They say to us that the word person in the Convention actually means a human being. But then they don't tell us what the word everyone in the Convention means. It's up for us to decide, to discern. How are we going to do that? Well, we go back up to the Canadian judge there, and he said that in order to distinguish the right, who it's referring to, he says, you gotta look at the nature of the right. You gotta look at what the right is identifying and what can be exercised. Is it a statutory right, or is it a natural right? Is it a human right and fundamental freedom? Keeping that in our heads, we go back to the American Convention on Human Rights and we see the following. Article 18, a right to a name. Now it says every person has the right to a given name. When we go back up, remember the word person means human being. So every human being has the right to a given name and to the surnames of his parents. Now notice the pronoun. It's not an it, it's a his or her. So his parents or that of one of them. The law shall regulate the manner in which this right shall be ensured for all by the use of assumed names if necessary. So this is a natural right being expressed here, a fundamental right. Again, every person, so every human being, has the right to nationality. Does it say you have the obligation? No. Having a right, does it produce an obligation? No. It produces a choice for us. So every human being has the right, the choice, to take on a nationality. Well, absolutely. You can't force me to be a citizen. You can't force me to take on a nationality. You can give me the right. You can protect it and safeguard it, but you can't force me to use it. And so we're seeing in the American Convention on Human Rights that our natural right is being preserved for us. Well, let's look at Article 21 then, the right to own property, which is a big contention both in Canada and in America, because a lot of people have felt that their property rights are being limited and abridged, and they don't know how to properly defend these limitations and abridgments. So in Article 21, it says the right to property. Now notice the subject or the player has changed. You see that? It's no longer every person. So we were going here and it said every person and every person. And these two express natural rights. And so we understood that every person referred to the human being, which is plural or meaning men and women. Now here when we come to Article 21, the subject and player has changed and it says everyone. And it says everyone has the right to use and enjoyment of his property. Okay, so they keep the personal pronoun there. And the law may subordinate such use and enjoyment to the interest of society. So who are they referring to? If we have a natural right and a fundamental right and freedom that says we have the right to own property alone, we have the right to hold our property not in association with anybody, and that this is a natural right and this is a natural human right that cannot be limited or abridged. I know they do it to us, but that's the essence of the original right that we possess. We have the right to have property, own it alone, not in association with anybody else, not subjected to anybody else. Now here the law is saying that everyone, the player, the subject, they have the right to own and to use this property, but these rights could be subjected in the interests of society. So do you think that the everyone here is a human being? Or do you think that the everyone here is bringing forth a statutory creature, a class of person, a class of being? Well, the rights that are being brought forth here upon this subject are being limited and abridged. And they're being limited and abridged for the interest of society, in the interest of mutual benefit of the public. Therefore, the everyone here is the homeowner. The everyone here is the statutory creature. So when you read these American conventions on human rights, there's 2 of them or 3 of them, but when you read them, you got to learn to discern who are they talking about. What right is being brought forth here? Is this a natural right? Is this a fundamental human right and freedom that applies for me as a man or a woman? Or is this a statutory right that's being brought forth? Now, when you look into the American Convention on Human Rights, Article 6, you find the following. No one. Okay, so now look what they did. They didn't say any person. It didn't say everyone. They used the subject or player, no one. It says no one shall be subjected to slavery or to involuntary servitude, which are prohibited in all their forms, as are the slave trade and traffic in women. So this is an expression, this is a direct expression of the rights and freedoms that are listed and enumerated in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 8. It says no one shall be held in slavery. Slavery and the slave trade in all their forms shall be prohibited, and no one shall be held in servitude. So what is the American Convention on Human Rights expressing? It's a document that's expressing, on one hand, again, natural law, fundamental human rights and freedoms, and on the other hand, it's expressing rights and freedoms in a democratic society. It sounds very much like the Constitution Act of Canada in 1982. Well, again, that's because the same operations of law have to find their expression within our domestic laws.